and attending conferences kind of around the globe. That's why I was saying it was lovely that we had one in Dublin. So thank you guys for doing that in Dublin. It was amazing to have it there. But I'm working on a couple of projects at the minute. One is a plant education program. So I've just finished my cannabis technician course. I'm also a Reiki master. I'll be completing my medicinal. I'll be a medical Reiki master at the end of September. So I'm working on that and on a plant education program with Dr. Kelly Seaman. We're working together on a really cool platform. So we're doing that, and those are all kind of midway through. And because of my technology background, my business partner and I are working on using tech for cultivation. So really exciting little projects, all just coming along itself. It's nice having kind of your day job that keeps the funds coming in, that will allow you to work on these passion projects. So yeah, look, it's lovely to be here. Welcome everybody, and yeah, looking forward to talking over the next while.
Cool. Lorna has fixed her mic, so she would like to introduce herself.
Hello, is that better?
Hello. Yes.
Yay, hello there. I'm Lorna, I'm in London. I'm a wig maker for film and TV by trade, but started Karma Queen last year to sell CBD because it's something I use myself for endometriosis and anxiety. My dad, who is quadriplegic, also uses cannabis. He's been on some trials for that, so I'm very interested in moving into that. And yeah, so I currently sell online and also at Broadway Market in Hackney. We're the first CBD sales there ever.
That's my favourite market.
Yay, come say hello, Thomas, next time you're around. I love it. I used to work there for a friend selling her Iranian food. And the whole time I was there, I was thinking, I want a business here. And I pitched to Hackney markets, and they said, oh, it's a 2-year wait, and then they called me in a few weeks later for a presentation, and I managed to sneak in, but then COVID happened. So yeah, that's where I'm at the moment. We're back now, been back for 3 weeks, so nice to meet you all.
Lovely to meet you.
Okay, Sal, you can take over.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for LCG Coffee.
Oh, Sal, you've been muted again.
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry about that. So yeah, today we're joined by Thomas Gray and Nikita, fortunately for us. So we've worked with Thomas and Nikita from the very beginning. We started our companies around the same time, about 2 years ago from now. And, you know, we've been on a very good journey together. So I really want to explore their perspective on things, you know, just before COVID and how it's been affected through COVID. And really look at what's happening with the talent, especially in Europe, and where the cannabis talent is going, you know, how people should really be adjusting for COVID, like post-COVID, as other industries are, and really understand, you know, what's happening with the talent out there. So to start off, Tom and Nikita, if you could quickly just introduce your roles at Blume and what Blume does in a nutshell.
Sure. So I'm Tom, co-founder of Blume and CEO. Our roles is, as you can imagine, in a startup, being very entrepreneurial. It's across the board at the moment, and but our background, very briefly, initially in not-for-profit, to do with brain injuries, particularly aphasia. I ran a charity when I left school at the age of 18 before going into university, and then I then worked in financial services for a couple of years, where I learned a little bit more about emerging markets, but I think my eyes were always set on the cannabis industry. And I've been in the industry now for about 3.5 years. The first year and a bit working as a consultant for a company called Grow Biotech, and then 2 years, coming up to 2 years now at Blume, in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Yeah. So I'm a co-founder of Blume and COO. I'm based here in Amsterdam, so it was kind of responsible for growing the international side of the business, and Tom has been holding the fort in the UK. My background has been, I worked for a medical cannabis clinic in Barcelona, which was the first of its kind, where I was responsible for the expansion to the German market. I've got a German passport and speak German. And but what I found most interesting in the experience at the clinic was, because I speak 3 languages, I often volunteered to be kind of the translator between patients and doctors, just to get a better understanding of how patients perceive these kind of medicines, what are the benefits that they're taking away from these things. And that really opened my eyes to like a whole different world of cannabis, the medical side of things. And then that got consolidated with somebody in my family getting cancer, and I treated her with the medications that I got and what I learned from that kind of clinic. She's now cancer free. And that kind of, consolidated it for me. I then did a bunch of consultancy work, all the way from like finding real estate, finding private clinics, for companies to work with, consulting on different supply, like raw materials and genetics, just really anything I could get my hands on in order to understand the industry more and more. After doing that for a few years, Tom approached me with the idea of a recruitment company, which was a gap that we both saw as a very relevant gap and something where we could make a change. And that was it. We formed Blume. And 2 years later, here we are.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the introduction. So, you know, since obviously COVID came in March, put most of Europe on lockdown, you know, what have you started seeing since then? Since March up until now? Are people losing their jobs in the industry? Are there new positions opening up? What are you really seeing at the moment, Tom and Nick?
So I think, like Marwan's camera, it turned our worlds pretty upside down in the first few weeks. And when there's a lot of uncertainty, particularly in early stage emerging markets, which are driven normally by investment, you can expect people to lose their jobs. And unfortunately, I think what we all expected, a consolidation of the market, sort of seeing these large public Canadian or North American companies that were overvalued. We're expecting this year was the year that they were going to be consolidating and losing some of that value and shrinking, and meeting the actual size of the market. But wrap that up with COVID, and it probably washed out more of the market than we were expecting, which sadly does mean that there was a lot of people that lost their jobs. I mean, between the two largest LPs, without saying any names, they fired over 1,000 people between them, which is really sad. And in a lot of cases, when we're speaking with some of these individuals, it's actually the case that they probably shouldn't have been hired in the first place. So from an optimistic perspective, the structure and the shape that these companies and organizations are now taking is the most sensible I've seen it since I've been in the industry, because people aren't building teams to raise investment anymore. People aren't building teams and facilities to raise investment. It's building teams for the purpose of driving revenue and for their business. So companies are starting to look a lot more lean, but it is at the expense of a lot of people that have unfortunately lost their jobs in this industry.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, the strategy at the beginning for investors was kind of a land grab strategy, where the bigger you are and the more people you have, the more investable you are, or you're going to be one of the big five. Whereas the kind of false promises from those companies not being fulfilled has kind of made investors look at the bottom line more, and that's what companies are now kind of shaping towards. And like Tom says, it's a much more realistic structure for the size of, or the life cycle of the company and this industry.
And to answer the question, are there jobs in now? And yes, in the past few months, things are starting to move, not in the same capacity you would expect in an inflated market like in the last few years. People are a little bit more sensible about the way that they hire, which is, from our perspective, a really positive thing, because that means that when people are hired, we hope that they're in their roles for a long time and they have a place to develop. But it means that there's less roles available at the moment. But that is starting to change. And there's certain things, as we work across Europe, there's certain things that will affect that. For example, change in regulations, announcements of new sort of application processes, like Nikita in a minute might be able to talk a little bit on what was going on in the Netherlands for a legal tender for recreational cannabis, which this sort of regulatory openings do create job opportunities as well. But it's moving at the pace of regulations, and I think we've all experienced how fast that moves. Particularly if you're looking in one country or one jurisdiction, it can be quite slow. If you're looking across Europe, it looks like a bigger picture and it's starting to move, but it's bit by bit, and I think we're all used to regulations and the rate that they travel, and it's not the speed of sound.
So the key thing that I got from your message, from what you both of you just said, and also from what I've spoken to other people as well, is that, you know, companies are getting more lean.
Yeah.
Pretty much. They're realizing that it's not just about numbers and having the biggest names and fancy positions. It's literally about getting the business lean.
Absolutely.
Before I move on to letting the audience ask a few questions, one main thing I want to ask is, you know, what should candidates and employers do to be more successful during this period? I mean, more successful in landing a job or acquiring talent.
Sure. In regards to candidates, it's always a time to be proactive. So I mean, and this sort of it's the same with employers. Someone right at the start of this this lockdown period told me that he was told that good businesses are defined by how they determine and how they act in adversity, and if they succeed or not in adversity. And initially I was a bit confused. I thought you could be a good business in good times as well, but to be really proven as a business that's going to last, if you can survive in adversity, then you're in a good place. And I think the same applies for candidates as well, interested in the industry. And normally the way to survive is being forward thinking and trying to spot the opportunities that are presented from a hard situation. And that could be more time to be studying, more time to understand what you really like. I feel like this COVID period was everyone's grounded and sent home and they have to think about who they are and what they like. And I think that's a really valuable time to start building a plan of how you want to go from here. Even with uncertainty ahead of us, there's still a lot we can do to build ourselves in the meantime, to make ourselves a bigger asset or more valuable, or even come up with our own business idea during this period. It just requires a different way of thinking than you may have had last year or the year before, because we're in a very different world.
I would add to that and say that one thing that I also think a lot of candidates should be adopting a little bit more is kind of a focus point, which is, in this industry, there's so many different things that you can get involved in. There's so many exciting gaps in the market that it's hard to sometimes focus on something that is going to give you the biggest return on investment and bring the most value to the industry. So I would always suggest that people kind of look at their past experiences and where they really believe that they're a specialist in, or where they can create the most value, and they position themselves in a way to bring that to the table when they're going to an employer or positioning themselves as a consultant. And I especially see this in consultancy work, where people are consultant on everything, where they have a bit of understanding, but it makes more sense to kind of look at your past experiences. Where do you have a proof of concept? Because people are also moving away from looking at a cannabis expert that just generally understands cannabis, but they're looking for people that have a proven track record in being able to do what they're saying they're consulting on. So I would suggest for candidates to definitely try and find a focus point and position themselves accordingly.
And just to add to that, it's the same applies for corporations and businesses as well.
Yeah, definitely.
The businesses that we've seen surviving, and the ones we'd expect to survive, are the ones that have very specific focuses on the market. So the idea of a vertically integrated cannabis company is, in my idea, a little bit of a utopian business. I mean, if you look at most traditional industries or anything that's an FMCG or agriculture or pharma, where it touches different sides of the market, it's very segmented. Coca-Cola don't grow their own sugar for a good reason, and because they own a very specific part of the supply chain, and they're the experts at it. And that's where I could see this industry going, in terms of these large LPs being chopped up into. But people that start on the right foot and focus initially can save themselves a lot of pain and a lot of energy, I believe. And for us, it's worked. And the people that we've seen having the same sort of focus, it's been a successful way of doing things.
So yeah. I've just seen a question from Marwan Elgamal. He's asked, can you define a cannabis expert, and how long should you be working in the scene to call yourself a cannabis expert?
Nikita,
just before you guys answered that, I think it's a great question, because as you was mentioning, Nikita, you know, people aren't just looking for cannabis experts anymore. They're looking for people that are experts in a specific field, whatever it is. You know? Yeah. So I think that's an especially important question for most people in Europe, because there's a lot of people that are entering the cannabis industry, including ourselves, who, you know, there was no education for cannabis. There was no, you know, training for specific. There is now. There are training courses for cannabis now, but 2-3 years ago there wasn't, and it's still very limited. So, you know, some people might feel like they have to be a specific expert on cannabis or know this, know that. So yeah, that's a good question, Marwan.
I think the word expert is a bit, I can give you an example when it comes to the cultivation space. So if you've maybe looked at the teams of a licensed producer, they'll have a position called master grower on there, which is the kind of head of production, head grower. And in the agricultural world, the name master is given to you by your peers and other growers at the same level of you, and they kind of crown you as a master. And I think, and that is kind of inflated in the cannabis industry, where people who have been growing cannabis for 2-3 years, which is more than maybe most of the market, they consider themselves experts. And I think it's a bit of an inflated label to call yourselves an expert at this stage. I think there is people who definitely understand the space very well and can take experiences from traditional sectors and therefore understand the cannabis industry in a much better way. But I think that it's smarter to position yourself as an expert in that focus point that I was talking about, instead of calling yourself a cannabis expert. And you can say, I'm an expert in this area, and especially within the cannabis industry, and I've got a proven track record in doing this in cannabis, or have a good understanding doing so, or have worked with companies doing so. But I think calling yourself just a cannabis expert is way too broad. And as the cannabis industry is not just one industry, it's kind of this umbrella industry, and it has FMCG, pharmaceuticals, it's got farming, there's loads of different industries within that. So where do you fit as an expert within those industries, and not just an expert in cannabis?
I would also add to that. So there's a guy, Professor Dedi Merry, who you may have seen him talking, really interesting guy. He heads up the Technion University in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and it's one of the largest cannabinoid research universities in the world. And he's spent a huge amount of time working, I think over 10 years, working at this university. And he's the first person to say, we don't know anything about cannabis and I'm not an expert. So yeah. Just like, I feel the more people learn about the industry, the more they realize that there's a lot to learn before anyone can be classed as an expert, because the industry itself is young. So maybe we're an expert in comparison to other people, but in comparison to traditional industries, I would say it's not fair for anyone really to be calling themselves an expert.
Yeah, I think
guys. We've got quite a few questions coming through now. And anybody would like to unmute themselves and ask a question, I think it would be fair to just quickly start from Michelle, as the question started from her, and then we can just, after you finish answering, next person can go ahead and answer.
I think someone had mentioned earlier, it was linked to the expert question, I suppose. And someone had mentioned that now that there was possibility of training or qualifications, where would that, does that go back to just, kind of within the industry, there are these master growers, or, can I go to college and get some sort of training? I know that sounds really basic, apologies, but yeah.
Yeah, no, there's definitely colleges out there, especially in America. There's like the Cannabis University. There is other online courses like Green Flower, also some that are actually opening up in the UK pretty soon. And yeah, so there is courses. The question is, who's accrediting these courses and how valuable are they? And
yeah, exactly.
And I think that those are the main questions. So I know that a lot of these online courses, there's very valuable information there. Some of the lecturers in those courses are the closest to what you could call an expert, because they've been in it for 20, 30 years. I mean, for example, I followed the Green Flower course, or didn't follow it, but I watched it, some parts of it. And there were some really interesting growers there speaking about their experiences, and it's valuable information. But at the end of it, I don't think you can call yourself an expert after you followed that course. But I think it gives you a better understanding of the environment, and which allows you to then position yourself where you want to position yourself. But I wouldn't say that at this stage there's anything out there really which after you graduate you can call yourself an expert in that industry. In America it's a little bit more advanced, where you do have like 4-year courses where it goes all the way from cultivation to extraction to cannabis business, running a production site, for example. And that's a little bit more in depth, but I'm not quite, maybe because I haven't followed the course myself, I'm not quite sure how valuable that is.
Your answer pretty much answers Lorna's question about is there any training qualifications that anyone would specifically rate? Could you quickly touch on that, Nick?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's about like a third-party accreditation, so that you can actually walk away after paying a certain amount of money for these courses and actually have a certificate that means something. That a lot of these courses will give you information that you're looking for, but if you're paying for something, you would like to walk away with an accredited kind of certificate that you can show to people and people understand what it means. So there is, for example, Green Flower, which is an American one that they do online courses. There is one educational platform that we're in conversations with to kind of help them a little bit, which is called the Plantific, that is opening up, and they're actually accredited by a third party. And yeah,
I missed the name of that one. Sorry.
The Plantific.
The Plantific, lovely. Thank you.
No problem. No problem.
And before I move on to Ciara's question, I think Ciara's question might go well after Edward's question, which is, Edward, would you like to ask it yourself or?
Hey guys, how's it going? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Hi everyone, thanks. Yeah, I just had a quick question on the possibility of CBD being classed as a narcotic across Europe could have drastic changes to the CBD markets in both the UK and Europe, and just wanted to know everybody's thoughts on that possible paradigm shift going forward.
Sure. I mean, it's like the classic cannabis industry, another surprise gut punch. It's from my personal perspective, I don't want to spend too much time thinking about it. Really, not to bury my head in the sand, but I don't see it as a huge likelihood. It's of course possible. If it does happen, there's certain people saying that because the UK is Brexiting, then we have a chance to become a hub for cannabis. My argument to that is, if the UK is a service hub, who are we serving? But if it does happen, it would be pretty catastrophic for the industry. And
Sure.
it put it in the hand of pharmaceuticals a lot more, which is why there's not a great deal unless you're a lobbyist and you can help equip lobbyists.
Exactly. Do you see more trade happening with Canada and the US because of that?
From the UK or?
From the UK. If CBD is a narcotic across Europe, CBD companies and players will be looking to the UK, even with novel foods hanging over our heads.
Absolutely.
Which is another topic in and of itself, but do you see that becoming, the UK as a hub to then, I guess, be a domicile to, import European companies, for lack of a better word, and then distribute or manufacture their products in the UK, and then connect that hopefully to the US as they're 5 to 7 years ahead of us?
So yeah, I would expect that if Europe becomes closed, I mean, potentially not from a pharmaceutical perspective, I'm sure they'll keep those channels open. They'll probably focus more on domestic cultivation and production. The idea is to preserve their own pockets. But if it's the case that the UK Brexits and we're the only ones that are playing around with it, then I'd expect us to become a little bit of a doorway. Yeah, absolutely. And people would probably use the UK, like Malta, for example, to gear up for when regulations do change, or we hope that they'll change again. But at the same time, we have to consider the level of uncertainty it will bring to businesses across Europe in general, and even in the UK. So from an investment perspective, we can't expect massive spikes because it's still regulations that are somewhat oppressing, although it may present an opportunity because of the negative pressure in the UK. But
just to add to that, Tom, from speaking with quite a few of the European companies at the moment, a lot of them, they're holding their horses, and it is a very scary time for them because it is such a big thing if it happens. But one thing that will happen if it does go through as a narcotic, hypothetically is it will definitely flush out a lot of the time wasting companies. A lot of the companies that are just not really, not feasible. And it's the same thing here. It's the same thing in the UK. COVID's already done that to a lot of cannabis companies. A lot of CBD brands I've seen disappear. A lot of initiatives and organizations that were doing movements, they've started to disappear because COVID's just, streamlined it and just basically flattened it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and, I think they've accelerated the consolidation. What normally would have taken 18 months for these companies to limp and then die has taken 6 months.
Yeah,
in short.
And just because we're limited on time, I just want to move on to Ciara's question. Do you want to say it yourself, Ciara?
Yeah, thanks, Al. So I was just wondering, do you see a smooth transition? I have, obviously I have a lot of colleagues who are interested in the space now, but do you see a smooth transition for candidates from traditional industries into the cannabis industries, so like the tech sector, fintech, financial services, etc.? Do you see, or like project management, just the general corporate jobs? Do you? Yeah, exactly. That's my background as well, and has been for like 15 years. So do you see a lot of people moving from the tech sector into cannabis, and have you seen that transition, and is it smooth? Obviously it's a different industry, but it's generally, is it a smooth transition?
It depends what for, but yeah, it depends what they're doing in the tech sector. If they're a coder, then there's certain technological projects out there, which is, and I think this goes back to what Nikita's saying, this identity crisis of the industry. If they're tech sales, then they could end up doing tech sales in the cannabis industry. If it's fintech sales, they could end up doing fintech sales in the cannabis industry. Yeah. It's not just because it's the cannabis industry. Their expertise should be in their core focus for the time being. How many fintech companies are in cannabis in Europe? But the experience in itself is still, I believe, absolutely valuable. If someone's a really good salesperson and they're used to selling things in a particular way, then there's certainly some overlap, but would be specific to the roles and what's available and their experience.
Yeah, and I think this is very much why Blume kind of came together, which is this idea of bridging people that understand the plant, the cannabis, and people that understand like commercials, and kind of bridging that gap between the two. And I think the way we kind of approach recruitment as well in this industry is like, if somebody is looking to sell their CBD brand into Boots and Holland and Barrett, for example, and they call us and they're like, we need a cannabis expert to sell to these accounts. Our response is, no, you need somebody that understands those accounts.
Commercials.
Yeah, and understands how to sell it to those brick and mortar shops, instead of finding somebody that understands the plant. And that's that kind of problem that we saw like a year ago, and still companies are getting better at it, but they're still looking for cannabis experts, which is this weird thing that we already spoke about. So to answer your question, absolutely. I think that people with a traditional experience should be the ones that are bringing a professional angle to this industry.
Okay, great. Well, expect to see some new CVs then, guys.
Yeah. Feel free.
Nice one. Thanks so much. And I'll just pick one last question before we wrap it up. We've got Marwan's question here. Do you see hemp picking up momentum and overtaking the CBD trends? Obviously, we've seen a lot more activity on LinkedIn, on the internet, and even through mainstream press about hemp. So have you guys noticed anything there? Are there any jobs popping up there?
So personally, I've got a real fascination for hemp. I think it's super interesting, and I like it at the moment because it hasn't been subject to the same hype as the cannabis industry. And there's a few reasons for that. But one of them right now, it's pretty hard to invest in hemp companies because of lobbying, because of the lack of people funding lobbying. So there's regulations which are quite restrictive to it being really commercially viable for hemp at the moment in the UK. If we had the same bubble that we'd have in the general cannabis industry and CBD happening with hemp, it would bring a lot of investment. There'll be some stupid projects and some good ones, but ultimately you would have more cultivation, probably more research into things like decortification machines to strip the fibers, and even just having some of those machines in Europe for people to share would be a positive first step. But it's sort of a chicken and egg where people can't see where the money's coming out because they don't know if regulations are going to change. And there's a lot of very restrictive EU regulations when it comes to people cultivating hemp, and it affects the bottom line massively, like having to destroy your flower in the UK, or being restricted to genetics, which aren't even very good for producing seeds or the shiv, which is the main reason a lot of people are doing it for. So even hemp farmers right now are being affected by, I mean, they've had a little bit of the fallout from the CBD space, because when they are going to apply for their license to renew, the Home Office have been inundated with licenses. So there's a lot of things that need to happen in-house or in the government that could be a little bit sharper to allow hemp companies to grow better. And it's a shame, because I think it's one of the most innovative parts of the industry, personally.
I also think that if you compare, or the question was if the CBD industry, if it's going to look like the CBD industry, and I think that the CBD industry, as we call it, is going to go down a lot, because I don't see CBD as a sole industry, or it's a one ingredient that this plant offers, and people have built a hype on that one ingredient. But we all know that it's about all of the ingredients, everything that the plant kind of offers. So I don't think that we're going to, I mean, what's going to happen next? CBG is going to be the next thing, and then there's going to be a CBG industry or something. I think it's one thing all within that umbrella. And that's why I think that hemp, yes, it's going to get bigger than the CBD industry, because there's like, I don't know how many industrial applications for it. And I think we're going to see companies also, as green initiatives increase as well, moving into like investing either into hemp, or even people offsetting their carbon emissions by, if you invest into, for example, into a hemp field, for example, you can calculate how much CO2 is sequestered by the hemp field, and then you can offset that to your own carbon emissions. So you can, for example, even call yourself a carbon neutral company by investing in hemp to a certain extent. And I think you're going to see a lot of those kind of initiatives, as well as the industrial initiatives come to play.
Yeah, they all need funding.
Yeah, that's a big problem right now. So
like lots of the UK hemp companies, sadly for the moment, don't have the sort of money they need to make the lobbying happen, but then they won't have that money if the lobbying doesn't happen. So it's like chicken and egg situation. It will get there. It will get there. It's just slow.
Thanks for answering all the questions, guys. So yeah, thank you to all the listeners for tuning in today for our coffee. Not everyone's got a coffee. I haven't seen anyone. But it's been great. And yeah, you can catch Thomas Gray and Nikita Kretu on LinkedIn. If you want to connect with them, ask any questions about obviously recruitment and the cannabis industry in general. I always go to Tom for any questions as well to catch.
Oh, Sally, you muted yourself.
I keep doing that. I need to stop doing that. So yeah, Christina, is there anything you want to add before we wrap it up?
No, the recording will be available on London cannagroup.co.uk, and I hope you guys will register for our next talk as well.
Excellent. Thank you guys for tuning in. See you later, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Lovely. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.